My name is Mariel, and I am a second year PhD student working at the Institute for Manufacturing. I am currently part of the Industrial Resilience Group, which is supervised by Dr. Mukesh Kumar. And today I would like to present a little bit about my research, which focuses on evaluating emerging food supply chains from both a resilience but also a cost perspective. And I am taking a particular look at the alternative protein industry. I got to this research idea because during my master, I did my master back in 2018 in engineering for sustainable development here at Cambridge as well. And I focused my dissertation on how to reduce the impact of meat production and consumption through a systems thinking approach. And it actually emerged quite nicely that an interesting opportunity is to develop further the alternative protein industry. Um, and yeah, looking at one of the gaps that are there, it's also quite clear that a lot of work is being done on how to develop the products themselves and the research behind it, but there is a bit of a lack on how to help upscale their supply chains and how to do it in a way that it's also sustainable. So that's why I'm currently looking at this project. And yeah, in the future, I would like to contribute a little bit more because it's such a novel field, the alternative. It's just something that it's emerging right at the moment. So contribute more in the academic side of it and also in the student community side of it. I'm part of the Alternative Protein Student Society, so working on how to develop more research in this field and how, yeah, develop more interest as well. So this is a little bit about me. I will just move on to the rest of the presentation.
Mariel, sorry to interrupt you. You're muted for whatever reason.
Oh, sorry, I've been muted the entire time. I hope not.
No,
Just
it was
now.
just the last minute. Yes.
No, no.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
Don't know what happened. Um, so yes, I normally like to start off with this question about is our current food system resilient? Just for us to think about. And by resilient, I mean, is our food system able to prepare, but also respond, recover, and grow from disruptions, such as the COVID-19 pandemic? And talking about food, is our food system able to provide sufficient, nutritious, and affordable food to everyone in the face of any unforeseen disturbance? Um, because for our food system to be resilient is like our human body to have a strong immune system that helps us to be healthy, to fight against threats and recover and learn from them. So that whenever there is a similar threat, we kind of know what we have to do and we don't make the same mistakes. Oh, it
What
seems
is
like
your
again I'm muted. Yeah, I don't know. I guess when I turn the slide, it mutes. So I'll turn it differently now. Um, Yeah, so I normally ask this question because based on what I have been reading here and there, it seems like our food system is actually broken. And it can be considered to be broken for multiple reasons because there are still billions of people that remain poorly nourished and millions of farmers living at subsistence levels. And considerable amount of food's being wasted. In fact, like 30% of the food that we produce for human consumption is wasted. And there are also poor supply chain practices taking a toll on the environment. Um, and for me personally, in fact, the food system might be considered to be broken because it's not able to provide food for everyone, especially whenever there is a problem. So this is mainly because maybe we have built our system to be lean and efficient, continuously finding ways on how to have more outputs for better and better with have more outputs with less inputs, how to reduce costs continuously. Um, and this is actually great when things are running smoothly. But whenever there is a glitch or a problem in the system, or whenever our system faces a threat and becomes sick, the food system can actually become weak and can actually break. And this can be seen through these three events that have caused an absence of key food products, closure of food production facilities, restricted food trade policies, and an increase in the food prices. Um, so it seems that based on the way that current supply chains operate, a low cost is actually an important metric for companies. However, based on the way what we have learned from these past events, developing resilience in our food system is actually critical to be able to continue operating in the long run. So it kind of feels like it kind of becomes evident that it's critical to be able to balance both, right? To balance both cost and also to balance resilience. And this is particularly true for emerging or novel food companies, where balancing resilience with cost becomes vital because one, you have to be able to remain competitive in the market, especially when you are fighting against companies that are well established for many years, and also to be able to withstand disruptions. So this balance is exactly what my research is about. So since I'm talking about emerging food products, I will be particularly focusing on the supply chains of alternative proteins, which are, according to the World Economic Forum, they are one of the main emerging technologies that can drive change in our food system. According to BCG, the alternative protein, it's a growing industry expected to claim as much as 22% of the overall protein market by 2035 and reach a value of over $300 million. So they actually represent an interesting opportunity to study novel food supply chains. And just for those that are not very aware of alternative proteins. What I mean by alternative proteins, these are non-animal proteins such as plant-based, fermentation-based, and cultivated meat products. So plant-based refers to those substitutes biomimicking meat using plants as building blocks. And we also have fermentation types of alternative protein. There are actually three main types of fermentation. So we have traditional fermentation, which is the process of changing food through microbial anaerobic digestion, so which is the way on how beer, wine, yogurt, cheese are made. There's also biomass fermentation, where the microorganisms that reproduce through this process are themselves ingredients for alternative proteins. So the perfect example is corn, which grows filamentous fungi via fermentation to use it as a primary ingredient in their products. And then we also have precision fermentation, which uses microorganisms to produce specific functional ingredients. So I like the metaphor where it says that microorganisms are specifically programmed to be little production factories of a specific ingredient, which is the way of how insulin for diabetic patients is actually produced. And then we have cultivated meat, of course, which provides genuine animal meat produced by cultivating animal cells directly in a bioreactor. And these products are all very interesting, particularly because they also offer a sustainable solution to bridge the supply and demand protein gap as the demand for meat rises. By 2050, global meat consumption is projected to reach around 500 million tons, which would mean a consumption of meat twice as high as in 2008. And I mean sustainable solution to conventional protein sources because they are continuously challenged in the sustainability arena. So in terms of the environment, animal agriculture is actually responsible for almost 15% of greenhouse gas emissions. In terms of food security, conventional sources of protein use up 75% of agricultural land, but yet only 1/3 of the global protein is provided. And in terms of public health, these products have also have been related to concerns about risks of cardiovascular diseases, antibiotic resistance, and spread of zoonotic diseases. And as I was mentioning earlier, well, a lot of current research and attention has been given to the development of the products themselves. My question at the moment is, how will their supply chains look like? Because we don't want these new supply chains to have the same problems as our current food supply chains, which are complex, inefficient, they're vulnerable, and they lack traceability. As some examples, of course. And then my second question is, what will happen to resilience? Because these emerging food companies continue also focus on traditional lean initiatives at the moment, because that's where we're coming from. And resilience is still perceived to be kind of a luxury that the big companies can afford, but not the smaller ones. So they actually think that this is something that they cannot invest at the moment, that they cannot afford. But this perception might actually be rooted in the fact that it is still unclear how to evaluate the level of supply chain resilience in food supply chains, and what the relationship between resilience and cost is. This is not yet well understood either. So companies at the moment currently choose to be more reactive rather than proactive, because it just seems to be easier. So this is what my research currently focuses on, and my question is how companies manage the trade-offs between resilience and cost in the context of emerging food supply chains. There are three main sub-questions. So I'm looking at how companies assess the level of supply chain resilience as number one, and then what are the cost structures associated with developing resilience? And then three, how do companies balance those two, supply chain resilience and cost? And as a second year PhD student, I've done some preliminary industry exploration and my literature review. And now I'm at the stage of my case study work in different alternative protein companies to map their supply chains and carry out some resilience maturity assessments. And then I will be doing some stress testing through simulation to understand how the supply chains would behave under different scenarios and different types of stress, to be able to integrate all of these findings into my PhD thesis, which would be finished in about a year or so, or two. Just to provide some insights on my literature review, in terms of the first question, which is how to evaluate resilience. Literature reveals that there are both quantitative and qualitative methods of assessing resilience, and how both have focused a lot, both methods, on understanding what are the capabilities or what are the building blocks of resilience, particularly based on what are the most common cited elements. So we have, for example, prevention, flexibility, being able to collaborate with others, having visibility in the supply chain, being agile, being adaptable. These are all kind of the ingredients, or to say the components of resilience. However, it is still clear from the literature how the elements or how these capabilities relate to each other and how they can be combined to achieve a certain level of resilience. So in a way that I like to put it easy, easy way, is that kind of we understand, or it has been studied, what the ingredients of resilience are, but the recipe of how to achieve a certain level of resilience based on these ingredients is not well understood, specifically for a type of supply chain, the specific types of supply chain. And then regarding my second sub-question with cost structures, the literature mostly focuses on economic and reactive and visible costs of resilience. But there are others which have been overlooked, such as the environmental costs, the social costs, and the hidden economic costs. So, for example, you can invest in having a great security equipment in your manufacturing plant, but there are social and economic costs hidden, which are associated with utilizing this equipment in the long run and also maintaining this equipment as well, which need to be considered as part of the equation. And also there are trade-offs. Sorry, I think you cannot see this here. But there are trade-offs associated between these capabilities and these costs. So for example, I muted myself again. For example, redundancy, which can involve, for example, having an alternative in case something happens. So for example, having extra inventory or an extra warehouse or an extra transportation option. This is normally associated with having a higher economic cost. And then the capability of being lean and being efficient, it can help reduce economic operational costs, but there can be environmental and social costs which can actually increase. And just as another example, collaboration in the supply chain, which is another capability of building resilience, it can actually bring down economic and social costs. Also, on the line of the trade-offs, there seems to be a lack of exploration on how to tailor and align specific supply chain resilience capabilities with the unique characteristics of some types of supply chains, and also with different types of disruptions, so that we can focus and prioritize them accordingly and be able to enhance resilience in a more cost-effective way. And based on these fronts, we have come up with 5 levels of resilience to be tested with companies from the emerging food industry, particularly the alternative protein industry. So we go from an ad hoc internal level of resilience to a more industrial ecosystem level of resilience. And the idea is to test this with these companies. I'm currently working with 4 companies at the moment, 2 from the fermentation side and 2 from the plant-based alternative side, to understand and map their supply chains, understand their capabilities, their vulnerabilities, and the strategies that they are implementing to achieve which level of resilience, and what are the resources that are being used to achieve the certain level of resilience, and which level can they afford and until where they cannot afford further. So this is what I'm currently looking at and currently working on in this second year of my research. And in terms of contribution, I expect this research in the practice to provide a practical method on how to evaluate the level of resilience, and a proposed process on how to manage the trade-offs between resilience, capabilities, and costs in emerging food supply chains. And in terms of theory, contribute to a new understanding of the concept of resilience and costs, expanding beyond the current literature scope, of course, and then typologies of resilience capabilities, hopefully interlinked to potential costs, and finding this recipe that I was mentioning earlier in my presentation. And all of this to be able to support the development of resilience in new and evolving novel food supply chains. And I would like to end just by saying that because we're talking about food at the end of the day, which is essential for our existence. Developing resilience in our supply chains should not only be an operational requirement or a luxury that we need to have, but it should be a social responsibility. Um, so yeah, thank you very much for listening, and I'm really looking forward to your comments or questions or anything that you would like to add. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mara. And sorry that sometimes your mic got muted. I don't know why, but we could hear everything very well, and it was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
A quick question on your slide. I wonder if you're able to go back. There were two terms or two concepts that I'm not very familiar with, and I was wondering if you could explain slightly more.
Definitely.
When you have the two circles, the two big circles. Yes, there.
Mm-hmm.
The two-stage stochastic programming models and the where is it? And the graph theory metrics approach. What are they exactly?
So I just tried to put some examples of the different methods that are used. There are like methods on like optimization. In the quantitative side, there are more like programming optimization models on how to achieve like a higher level of resilience, which is normally calculated through a metric, because we're talking about a quantitative assessment. So it's more like the optimization programming side of it, and the qualitative side of it. I try to put some examples, but mainly they are like using stakeholders' opinions on for them to evaluate certain capabilities. And some frameworks use, for example, the one in the middle, the robust, agile, lean, and flexible, they focused only on those four types of capabilities. And what they do is that they look at different operational activities of the supply chain, and they grade them based on experts' opinion on how robust, agile, lean, and flexible they are. And then they get like a final like number on
like a
on
scoring.
what resilience is. Yes. I'm not quite sure yet of the details of the graph theory matrix. I think I would like to look into that. But basically the idea, these are just some examples, is there are many more.
Yeah.
But the idea is that there are multiple ways, and some of them just focus on specific capabilities, not on all of them. And of course, they overlook like the interrelationships between them, because they just like grade the capabilities, but they don't see, okay, maybe if I include flexibility, okay, great, it increases, but maybe it affects my redundancy, because then I don't need as much inventory if I want to be flexible. So then I lose that buffer, so to say, whenever there is a disruption. So it can increase one, but it can decrease another. And these relationships are quite not clear.
Okay, I understand. And so are you comparing different types of industry in terms of the robustness, the resilience, or you're focusing only on the food, system?
I'm focusing specifically only on novel food and the food industry, and more specifically on novel food supply chains. And more specifically on alternative proteins. Yes.
Nice. Okay.
So my results will be applicable for this industry in a specific, and then future work might need to be able to see if they can be replicated in the other industries. Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. I was asking you just because I thought perhaps other industries might have, models or examples that could be then applied to the food industry and improve it, or, introduce different solutions.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So in terms of my current work, it is focusing, like my case study and simulation will focus specifically on alternative proteins. But for my literature review, I did look at different fields. So I looked at infrastructure, food, and other industries to understand what methodologies and assessment methods they were using.
Okay,
Yes.
I understand.
That's
Thank
actually
you.
a change I had to make
Okay.
in my first year, that I focused only on food, and then I had to expand the scope. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mario. Um,
Yes.
I have more questions, but I would like to ask the
Yeah.
rest of the group to ask questions and make.
Great. I think I can see Bruna's hand, if I'm not mistaken. I will remove the presentation, but I can share again if necessary.
Yes, I just had, first of all, thank you for the presentation. It was super interesting. Looking at it, it looks like such a big kind of research. Like it looks like a lot of research going. But anyways, so I just wanted to give you this question. You have spoken about 2 companies in fermentation, if I got it correctly, and another one in plant-based. So my question is, other two in plant-based. All right. So my question is, do you think you're gonna focus also on the cultivated meat production supply chain? And if not, why?
That's a great question that I've been asking myself as well. But because I have to define criteria to select my case study companies, I did have to, one of my criteria is that they need to commercialize their products at the moment. So cultivated meat, I know that there are some companies that do sell their products, but at the moment there are not many. So it kind of becomes tricky for me to include cultivated meat in my work because of that, because I do need to look at the end product, but also at the supplier. So if they're not currently commercializing their products, then it's more like a research development kind of side rather than a supply chain already developed side that I can look at. So it becomes a bit tricky, but I would love to, though. Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mario. Mario, I guess you're focusing on, is it UK, the UK market, or you're also looking at the internationally as well, or other countries?
So
to make it even bigger.
yes, so I'm currently focusing on EU and UK.
Okay.
But of course, at the end of the day, it actually has an international scope because, for example, I interview one of the companies doing fermentation based, and 3 of their main key products are not sourced in the UK. They come from Brazil or they come from other countries. And I have to go back to those suppliers and understand, okay, what is your process? What are inputs do you need? Because resilience goes back to the beginning, right? So you have to understand their suppliers as well. So even though the focal company is located in the UK and in the EU, at the end of the day, as I understand their supply chain, I'm taking an international look, if it makes sense.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Cool, of course, it makes sense. So would you say, Maro, in a way, an element to contribute to resilience could be or would be to improve self-sufficiency or self-reliance at least?
Yes, exactly. So it's a way of being able to, whenever there is a disruption, to be able to operate on your own, do not have a great dependency on others. If you are able to do that, of course.
Yeah. Which also means working on consumers' choices, right? Because you also want them to be able to be flexible enough and adapt to the new offer effectively.
Because a disruption can not only be like an environmental challenge, but also a change in the demand or a change in the market, and how would alternative proteins react to that? Alternative proteins actually represent an interesting opportunity to be resilient because they're from one of the results from the initial case studies is that they have potential for localized production. So fermentation, by producing filamentous fungi in bioreactors, you can produce them locally. It has a very short supply chain. That's what I'm trying to say. So it's an interesting opportunity for food security and for food supply chain resilience. Of course, there are other considerations that need to be taken, like specific climate conditions and water conditions that the fungi or these microorganisms need. They are very specific on what their needs are to be able to produce the food that we have. So there are pros and cons, but they have a lot of potential for localized production, definitely, which is great for resilience and food security.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else? Comments, questions? Otherwise, I don't want to monopolize. Do that. So, Lisa, you were curious to know what Mariel was doing.
Yeah, I mean, I maybe have a very broad question. I was wondering what is an industry with a really resilient supply chain? To look at some kind of role model, what works well, in your opinion?
I don't have like a specific name or company in mind, but it depends as well on the disruption side. So in terms of food, I would say that a resilient supply chain would be one that can react fast to any disruption and produce locally, and be agile, and efficient in the way that there's not a lot of food waste. But in terms of other industries, for example, the energy industry, it's clear that you cannot change your infrastructure from one day to another because you have these huge nuclear reactors. So it's more about, okay, how do you respond quicker and having better partnerships with your suppliers? And so it depends on the type of disruption and the type of supply chain that you're looking at. I don't,
Yeah.
Sarah, for example, if I could bring an example, has been mentioned as a resilient company in terms of market changes, because you know that they produce their clothing in Europe. So whenever there's a change in the market, they are super resilient in the sense that they can react really fast because they're close to the market and they have a really like good connection with their supply. They have a diversified set of suppliers. They just don't rely just on one. So if there's a fire in one, then they cannot do anything. No, it's not like that. So in terms of market changes, Sarah is an example in the clothing industry of one that reacts really. It's flexible and agile.
And I suppose, for example, the food industry has variable factors like, say, seasonal workers, which, for example, I don't know, the pharmaceutical industry doesn't have, or climate change, again, doesn't probably impact the pharmaceutical industry then as it is impacting the food industry, right?
Yeah, exactly. We have to deal with perishability of the products as well, which is it's coming up a lot in the case studies on how they need to manage the specific amount of weeks they need to transport from one supplier to another, which again, in the alternative protein side, because the supply chain is so short, then it helps that front.
Yeah. Any more questions? Jennifer or Nelson? Questions, comments? You can also share your experience with what you're doing and comparing it with what Mario's been talking about. No. No questions. No questions from Jen.
No questions.
No. Okay. No worries. Mario, on Wednesday we also had a webinar on. It was focusing on the food desert, and obviously communities, and where was one of the beneficial factors that can be considered and taken into account to create a more resilient system, which I think you also mentioned in your slides.
This coming Wednesday, you mean, or
no?
Just passed?
This just passed. Yes, but it's been recorded, so we will share the recording.
Okay, that would be amazing. And you're also hosting a sustainable food research symposium. Right?
Yes, on the 21st. So I hope that you coming as well. So I hope that Bruna, Lisa, and others, if you have time, do join us. It is now between 9 and 2, so it's only in the morning. Actually, we need to update the time. But yes, yep. And
That's
it's on
great.
your side, Mariel, so you won't go too far. And
That's
the rest
great.
have.
Yeah, true. I think my supervisor is presenting as well.
Yes,
so.
yes, Mukesh is presenting
Mukesh.
and Jag as well. So that's great. Great.
Amazing.
Great. Any further, I don't know, comments? So would you like to add anything else, Mario, in terms of where you're going next? You know, what are you hoping to do in your last year of your PhD?
Well, I hope to finalize my case study work in this coming months. I'm aiming for summer, because then after that I need to start with the simulation part of it. So I need to start building or constructing the supply chains models in a simulation software and try to design the scenarios that I will be using to test if I change like a particular variable, what will happen to the supply chain if we're talking about geopolitical risk, or if we're talking about an environmental change. How will these supply chains look like? And I think the only way to do it is through simulation. So I need to start thinking about how to construct those models after summer. So that's kind of where I'm going towards. I'll keep you posted on how that goes.
Yes,
but
yes. We look forward to that. That's great. Thank you so much. Well, good luck with the rest, and I'll see you hopefully on the 21st. And yeah, thank you again, Mario. That was great. And if you're happy with that, we'll share the slides.
Yes.
If you wouldn't mind sending them to Abigail or I. And great. See you next time, and have a good weekend. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for hosting.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you for staying.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye-bye.